Hey guys, Mitch with Shock Therapy, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the newly designed BSD adjustable spacer kit. This kit's going to do a couple of things for you guys. Number one, it's actually going to allow you to really fine-tune the bump steer that is known in these cars. Number two, each Can-Am is going to be different, so you have to measure it to determine what bump steer number that you guys have. With this kit being adjustable, it actually allows you to move the spacers around inside the spindle itself to eliminate all of the bump steer. This install does take a little bit more time, so allow yourself 3 to 4 hours to really focus on the measurements. Let's jump on in. I'm going to show you guys how to do it. So before we jump into the actual installation on the vehicle, I want to show you guys the individual spacers, and we're actually going to show you on this spare spindle that we have here the orientation that you can actually put the rod end into the spindle itself. So if you're looking at the spacers, you're going to have 4 spacers per side. 2 of them are going to be the same. You're going to have a taller high miss style spacer, and you're going to have a short, very small high miss style spacer. Now, there is a couple different ways that this can be put into the spindle depending on the height that we're looking for to correct the actual bump steer number in the car. But to start off, we're going to show you guys the center kit first, which is going to kind of mimic a factory location, if you will. And then we'll jump into a half kit and a full kit, and then we can also explain to you the opposite of that, so an upside down half kit or an upside down full kit as well. So starting with the center kit, you're basically going to have your taller high miss style spacer on the top, your short smaller high miss spacer on the bottom, and then your 2 individual spacers on the bottom as well. When you put that into the spindle, you can see that the rod end is centered between the 2 joints of the spindle itself. That's what we're going to call a center kit. Now we'll go to a half kit here, which would basically be taking one of your smaller spacers on the bottom and putting it on the top. Now what we just did with that particular kit is we actually lowered the rod end, the height of that one spacer, down inside the spindle itself. Now we're going to show you guys the full kit, which is going to be the lowest that this rod end can sit inside of the spindle. So what you're going to do is take that last spacer from the bottom and put that on the very top. And if we put that inside here, you can see how low the rod end is actually sitting inside the spindle itself. That is what we're calling the full kit. Now there's other ways that you can do this. This can actually be flipped, so you'll have the rod end at the very top. Most cars aren't going to see this, but it is adjustable in that sense because every single Can-Am is very different. So giving you guys the option to actually have this adjustment makes it pretty easy.
The first step in the installation is to measure your factory toe at ride height. This is done by measuring from the inside of the tire to the inside of the tire with a tape measure butted up against the sidewall of both tires. Next, take the same measurement from the back side of the front tires.
A good tip for you guys before you actually start measuring the factory bump steer in the car, grab a pen and paper and write down your measurements of the front of the tire and the rear of the tire, and that will help you determine what kit to use at the end of the install. Now, before we actually begin cycling the car, we do want to let you guys know that the correct way to do this is to go from ride height to full droop to fully compressed. Basically cycle the car in all 3 locations. What we're going to show you in this install is a shortcut around that. We're going to be going from ride height to full droop. We understand that people at home aren't going to want to pull their shocks off or have the ability to cycle their car fully. So we're going to show you a little bit of an easier way to determine what kit you need to use. So now that we have our ride height toe numbers, what we're going to do next is jack the car up to full droop to where both tires are off the ground slightly. And we're going to do that same measurement on the front side of the tire and the back side of the tire. We're going to document that, and we'll come back and look at it and see what our factory bump steer number is.
Now you can jack up the front of the car until both front tires are slightly off of the ground and begin taking your measurements on the front side of the tire and the rear side of the front tire. With the vehicle at full droop, you can now begin taking your toe measurement at full droop. Remember, this is done by butting the tape measure against the inside of the sidewall of both front tires. Next, take the same measurement on the back side of the front tires, making sure that the tape measure is butted up against the inside of the sidewall of both tires.
Now that we have the full droop factory bump steer number, we're going to go back to our paper here and we're going to look at ride height numbers to full droop numbers to determine what our factory bump steer is in this car. So looking at our ride height numbers, we were 49 inches in the front and we were 49.5 inches in the rear. So we're a ½ inch towed in at ride height. We're going to go ahead and write that down. And then at full droop, we were 44.25 in the front and 44.5 in the rear. So we are a ½ inch towed in at full droop. Now typically, when you full cycle this, you're basically going to double your number at full droop. So we're sitting at about a ½ inch of bump steer factory in this car, which is going to replicate a center kit. Now the center kit can be anywhere from 0 inches to 3/4 of an inch. It's going to vary from car to car depending on the car itself. Again, this is the shortcut way to determine what the bump steer in the car is. The correct way to do this is to actually pull the shocks off and do a full cycle all the way down to fully compressed and determine the toe setting number at that point as well.
If your vehicle had different numbers than what the center kit would require, we are now going to walk you through the factory bump steer numbers that would require a half kit. Starting with ride height, make sure you measure the front side of the front tires along with the rear side of the front tire to get your ride height toe setting. Next, jack the car up to full droop and take those same measurements on the front side of the tire along with the back side of the front tire as well, and make sure to document your numbers.
So now that you have your ride height measurements and your full droop measurements, we're going to go back to the paper and look and see what those were. At ride height, we had 49 inches in the front and 49.5 inches in the rear. So we're sitting a ½ inch towed in. And at full droop, we were 45 inches in the front and 46.1 in the rear. So we're about 1.1 inches towed in, which is going to give us 3/4 of an inch of bump steer at this certain kit. Now, we do understand that if you were to full cycle this, you're going to be sitting at about 1.5 inches total bump. Now, anywhere from, let's say 7/8 to 1 5/8, you're going to be required to use the half kit.
If your vehicle did not require the half kit, we are now going to show you factory numbers that would require you to install a full kit. Starting at ride height, make sure to measure from the inside of both front tires along with the rear to get your factory toe measurement. Make sure to document your factory ride height numbers. Next, jack the car up and measure from the inside of both front tires along with the back side of both front tires to get your full droop toe measurement.
Now that you have your ride height numbers and your full droop numbers, we're going to go back and look at what those numbers were to determine the factory bump steer. At ride height, we had 49 inches in the front, and in the rear, we also had 49 inches. So we are 0 towed at ride height. At full droop, we had 48 inches in the front and 50 inches in the rear. So we were sitting at 2 inches towed in at full droop. Now, at full cycle, you would basically be doubling that number. So you're sitting at 4 inches of bump steer throughout the whole cycle of the suspension. Now, anything from 1 7/8 to 2.5 inches from ride height to full droop is going to require the full kit. The larger the number of bump steer that you have from ride height to full droop is going to require the rod end to sit lower and lower as the number increases. So, little tip just to remember. Depending on what your measurement was for your factory bump steer is going to determine the center kit, the half kit, or the full kit. In this case, we're going to be installing the center kit just because of the numbers that we got through the cycle. If your car requires a different kit than what we're installing on the car right now, please refer to the beginning of this video to see the location of the center kit, the full kit, and the half kit based off of the numbers that your car was given for a factory bump steer number.
You can now remove the front passenger wheel and tire. Next, loosen the jam nut on the rack side of the tie rod using a 22mm wrench. Next, remove the factory cotter pin. Using an 18mm wrench and socket, remove the spindle bolt, making sure that you save all factory hardware. Next, remove the factory tie rod by unthreading it from the rack side itself. You can now install the shock therapy tie rod, starting on the rack side, making sure to bottom out the tie rod against the jam nut. Insert the tie rod, rod end, and spacers into the spindle and reinstall using the factory hardware. With the factory hardware installed, make sure you torque the spindle bolt down to 88 foot-pounds and install the supplied cotter pin.
Couple things to note when you guys do install the new shock therapy tie rod. Make sure that when it is installed, both ends of the tie rods are completely bottomed out on the rack itself and the rod end on the spindle side. When you install the kit, make sure that you do tighten down the bolt that goes through the spacers, through the spindle, everything. Make sure that's snug, because when you go to your finish cycle to make sure that your measurements are correct, if that is loose, it can cause some play inside of that, which can affect the total overall bump steer number as well.
You can now reinstall the front passenger wheel and tire along with the lug nuts, making sure that you torque them down to the recommended number depending on the lug nuts you are using. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. Lower your vehicle back to the ground.
Once you have both tie rods installed onto the car with the correct kit that you're going to need to correct the bump steer, our next step is going to be basically lining up the front tires with the rear tires as close as we can. Always important to make sure that your steering wheel stays straight the entire time. Once we get them close, we're going to bust the tape measure out again, and we're going to set our toe to 0. So our front number is going to be the same as our rear number. And we're going to recheck our cycle from ride height to full droop and make sure we're spot on.
Line up the front tire to the rear tire as close as you can by twisting the tie rod to where the tire begins to come in on the front side. Take a step back and visualize the front tire to the rear tire, getting it as close as you possibly can, making sure that your steering wheel stays centered the entire process. Repeat these steps on the opposite side.
So now that we have our front tires in line with the rear tires as close as we can get them, we're going to measure the toe in the front and the back of the front tire to make sure that we are set at 0. Once we've achieved that, we're going to jack the car up and measure that same measurement at full droop. Remember guys, when you are setting your final measurement to 0 for your toe, make sure that that steering wheel is centered and it stays centered the entire process.
You can now begin setting your toe measurement to 0 by measuring the inside of both the front and rear of both front tires. When you have achieved the 0 at ride height on both the front and back side of the front tires, you can now jack up the car and take the same measurements on the front and back side of both front tires.
Now that you have the kit installed and your toe is set to 0 at ride height, we jacked the car up, we measured our toe at full droop. We had 44.25 in the front and 44.5 in the rear, which means we had a 1/4 inch of toe in. So 1/4 inch of bump steer, which in return is going to mean about 1/2 inch of bump steer at full cycle. So if you were to fully compress this car and measure it at a full cycle standpoint, you'd be about 1/2 inch of bump steer. Now that's pretty good. That's about the most you're going to get out of these cars unless you have the Shock Therapy steering rack where you can actually lower the center link and get more adjustability out of it. But 1/2 inch is a great number to be seeing out of any of these Can-Ams. Once you're satisfied with the bump steer numbers in your car, you can then lower it back down to ride height. Make sure that you set your toe to a 1/4 inch toed in. Once that's complete, you can then lock down the jam nuts on the tie rod themselves. Make sure that you take it to a qualified alignment shop to have it professionally aligned, and then your installation is complete.
Lower the vehicle back to the ground and drive the vehicle back and forth to settle the suspension to begin setting your toe at a 1/4 inch toed in. You can now begin adjusting both passenger and driver's side tie rods to achieve your 1/4 inch toed in, making sure that your steering wheel stays centered the entire process. Measure your toe to ensure that you have achieved your 1/4 inch of toe in at ride height. With your 1/4 inch of toe achieved at ride height, you can now lock down both jam nuts on the passenger side tie rod. Repeat these steps on the driver's side tie rod and your installation is complete.
We hope that this video helped you guys with the installation of the new BSD kit at home. The most important thing with this kit is to make sure to cycle this in all 3 locations. It's going to determine which kit is actually going to be used because each car is going to be different. When finishing the installation, make sure to tighten all the jam nuts on the tie rods and torque your spindle hardware to 88 foot-pounds. If you like this video, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell to be notified anytime that we post a new video. If you'd like to order this kit or any other products that we offer, feel free to visit the website at shocktherapyusa.com. For any other technical help, give us a call at 623-217-4959.